The rain hammered against the viewing windows of the orbital station as Commander Zektar paced his luxury quarters. His 6-foot frame moved with the fluid grace typical of his species, the Velthari, while his silver skin caught the artificial light. Behind him, cowering in the corner, sat a creature that had once been his pride and joy. Nyx whimpered softly, her large amber eyes tracking her master's every movement. She was a Canis stellaris, a rare breed engineered specifically for the Velthari elite. Her fur, once a pristine silver white, had grown patchy and dull over the past few months. A genetic defect had caused asymmetrical markings to appear across her face, and her left ear had begun to droop unnaturally. "Look at you," Zektar sneered, his voice carrying the melodic quality of his people. "You were supposed to be perfect, a symbol of my status among the fleet commanders. Now you're nothing but an embarrassment." The alien dog pressed herself lower against the cold metal floor. She had been with Zektar since she was a pup, bred in the finest genetic laboratories of the Velthari homeworld. For 3 years she had been his constant companion, accompanying him to diplomatic functions and military ceremonies. Admirers would often comment on her beauty and grace, and Zektar had basked in their praise. But nature had played a cruel trick. The same genetic modifications that made her species so desirable sometimes carried unexpected consequences. The defects had appeared suddenly, transforming her from a prized possession into what Zektar saw as a liability. "The Council of Admirals is visiting next week," Zektar continued, his tone growing colder. "I cannot have them see me with a defective companion. It would ruin my reputation, destroy any chance I have of advancing to the Supreme Fleet Command." Nyx's tail, once held high with confidence, now tucked tightly between her legs. She understood more than her master realized. The Canis stellaris had been engineered not just for beauty, but for intelligence. She knew she was being rejected, abandoned for circumstances beyond her control. Zektar stopped pacing and activated his communication device. The holographic image of a gruff-looking alien appeared, his species unknown to Nyx but clearly involved in less savory aspects of station life. "Broker Vex, I have a disposal job for you," Zektar said without preamble. "A Canis stellaris, defective but still valuable for parts or research. I need it gone within the hour." The hologram's eyes gleamed with interest. "A stellaris? Even defective, that's worth significant credits on the black market." "Consider it done, Commander. My crew will be there shortly." As the communication ended, Nyx felt a chill that had nothing to do with the station's environmental systems. She had heard stories whispered among the other companion animals on the station, creatures that disappeared in the night, never to be seen again. Some were sold to research facilities where they were subjected to painful experiments. Others were butchered for their rare genetic material. Zektar wouldn't even look at her as he prepared to leave his quarters. "Someone will be here soon to collect you," he said dismissively. "Try not to make this more difficult than it needs to be." The door hissed shut behind him, leaving Nyx alone in the quarters that had been her home for 3 years. She wandered through the familiar spaces, her claws clicking against the polished floor, the expensive bed where she used to sleep, the feeding station with its pristine bowls, the toys that Zektar had once delighted in watching her play with. All of it now felt foreign and cold. Outside the window, she could see the lower levels of the station where the maintenance crews worked. Humans moved among the machinery, their smaller frames darting between the larger alien workers. She had always been curious about the humans with their expressive faces and the way they seemed to show genuine affection for the working animals in the cargo bays. 20 minutes later, the door chimed. Nyx's ears perked up despite her fear. 2 rough-looking aliens entered, members of a species she didn't recognize. They wore stained coveralls and carried restraining equipment that made her stomach clench with terror. "There's the pretty little defect," one of them sneered, approaching her with a neural prod crackling with electricity. "Broker Vex is going to make a fortune off you even with those ugly markings." Nyx backed against the window, her breathing rapid and panicked. These weren't going to be her new caretakers. These were the creatures that would take her somewhere dark and terrible, where her life would end in ways she didn't want to imagine. The first alien lunged forward with the restraining collar, but Nyx's enhanced reflexes kicked in. She dodged to the side, her powerful legs carrying her toward the door. The second alien was ready for her, blocking her path with an energy net that hummed menacingly. "Feisty one," he chuckled. "The research labs love it when they fight." Makes the experiments more interesting. As the net descended toward her, Nyx made a desperate decision. She had spent 3 years watching Zektar operate the door controls. Her enhanced intelligence had allowed her to memorize the sequence, though she had never dared to use it. With a burst of speed that caught her captors off guard, she leaped toward the control panel. Her paw struck the emergency override button, and the door burst open. Alarms began to blare throughout the section as she bolted into the corridor. Behind her, she could hear the aliens cursing and scrambling to follow. But Nyx had one advantage they didn't expect. She knew every inch of this station. For 3 years she had walked these corridors with Zektar, memorizing every turn, every shortcut, every maintenance access that might serve as a hiding place. Now, as she raced through the twisting passages of the orbital station, she had only one thought driving her forward: survival. Somewhere in the maze of metal and machinery she hoped to find safety. What she didn't know was that her desperate flight was about to lead her to an encounter that would change everything. She thought she knew about kindness and loyalty. The maintenance tunnels of Orbital Station Kepler-7 were a labyrinth of pipes, conduits, and crawlways that most of the upper-level inhabitants never saw. Nyx squeezed through a narrow ventilation shaft, her heart pounding so hard she was sure it would give away her location. Behind her, the sound of heavy footsteps and alien cursing echoed through the metal passages. "She went this way," one of the bounty hunters shouted, his voice distorted by the acoustics of the tunnel system. "A defective Stellaris is still worth 50,000 credits. We're not losing her." Nyx pressed herself against the cold metal wall of a junction point, trying to control her panicked breathing. Her enhanced hearing picked up every sound: the scrape of boots on grating, the hiss of hydraulic systems, and the distant hum of the station's massive engines. She had been running for nearly an hour, and exhaustion was beginning to set in. The defects that made her undesirable to Zektar were now proving to be obstacles in her escape. Her drooping left ear threw off her balance, and the patchy fur on her paws provided less grip on the smooth surfaces. Still, her intelligence remained sharp, and she used it to stay one step ahead of her pursuers. Through a crack in the wall plating, she could see into the main engineering section. Humans in blue coveralls moved efficiently between massive machines, their voices calling out status reports and coordinates. She had always wondered about them. Unlike the Velthari and most other species on the station, humans seemed to treat their working animals with genuine care rather than viewing them as mere status symbols. "Reactor coolant pressure is stable," a female voice called out in the human language. Nyx's linguistic implants translated automatically. "Jake, can you check the thermal regulators on level 7? A tall, dark-skinned human looked up from a control panel, wiping grease from his hands with a stained cloth. "Copy that, Maria. I'll take Rex with me to check for any coolant leaks." Nyx watched as the human called Jake whistled softly, and a large, shaggy earth dog emerged from behind a generator housing. Rex was clearly a mixed breed, his fur a mottled brown and black, with one ear partially torn from some past adventure. But what struck Nyx was the way Jake's face lit up when he saw the animal, and how Rex's entire body wiggled with joy at the attention. The contrast was stark. While Zektar had discarded her the moment she became less than perfect, this human showed obvious affection for a creature that would be considered utterly worthless by Velthari standards. Rex was scarred, asymmetrical, and completely unremarkable by any measure of genetic perfection. Yet the bond between him and Jake was unmistakable. A sudden crash echoed through the ventilation system, snapping Nyx back to her immediate danger. The bounty hunters had found the access shaft she had used, and they were getting closer. She needed to move, but fatigue was making her decisions cloudy. "Security sweep in progress," an automated voice announced throughout the station. "Unauthorized. Movement detected in maintenance sectors 12 through 18. All personnel maintain standard safety protocols." Jake paused in his work, frowning at the announcement. "That's weird," he muttered to Rex. "Security sweeps usually happen during shift changes, not in the middle of a work cycle." Through the crack in the wall, Nyx saw him move toward a communication panel. His movements were careful and deliberate, showing the kind of attention to detail that kept the station's vital systems running smoothly. She found herself hoping desperately that he would help her, though she had no reason to believe a human, would risk trouble for an alien creature he had never seen. The sound of metal being torn apart came from directly behind her. The bounty hunters had broken through a maintenance panel and were now in the same ventilation system. Nyx could hear their breathing, smell their alien scents growing stronger. In moments, they would round the corner and find her. Panic drove her to make a desperate choice. She pressed her paws against the loose wall panel and pushed with all her remaining strength. The metal gave way with a screech, and she tumbled through into the engineering section, landing hard on the deck plating. Every human in the immediate area stopped working and stared at her. Nyx crouched low, expecting to be grabbed or stunned or worse. Instead, she heard Jake's voice, soft and concerned. "Hey there, girl. What are you doing down here?" He approached slowly, his hands visible and empty. Rex trotted alongside him, his tail wagging as he sniffed curiously in Nyx's direction. Unlike the clinical, evaluating gaze she was used to from the Velthari, Jake's expression was one of genuine worry. "Maria, look at this," Jake called to his colleague. "This is a Canis stellaris. They're worth more than our entire annual salaries. What's one doing in the maintenance tunnels?" Maria approached, her expression equally concerned. "She looks terrified, Jake. And look at those markings. Someone might have discarded her because of the genetic variations." The sound of heavy footsteps echoed from the broken wall panel. The bounty hunters would emerge any moment. Nyx looked between the opening and the humans, calculating her chances. She could run again, but she was exhausted and running out of places to hide. Or she could trust these strange creatures who seemed to see value in imperfection. Jake seemed to understand her dilemma. His eyes moved from her to the damaged wall panel, where voices could now be heard clearly. Without hesitation, he stepped between Nyx and the opening. "Rex, stay with the girl," he commanded softly. The Earth Dog immediately positioned himself next to Nyx, his solid presence offering unexpected comfort. "Maria, hit the emergency containment protocol for this section," Jake ordered. "We've got unauthorized personnel in the maintenance systems." His colleague's fingers flew over a control panel, and suddenly blast doors began to slide shut across multiple access points. The voices from the wall panel grew more frantic, then faded as the hunters found their path blocked. Jake knelt down to Nyx's level, his brown eyes meeting her amber ones. "You're safe now," he said simply. "Nobody's going to hurt you while I'm around." For the first time since her defects had appeared, Nyx felt something she had almost forgotten. Hope. This human, this creature that the Velthari considered primitive and crude, had risked his own safety to protect her without asking for anything in return. As the engineering section settled back into its normal routine, with the blast doors sealing off the maintenance tunnels, Nyx realized that her understanding of value, beauty, and loyalty was about to change forever. In Jake's workshop, surrounded by the honest noise of working machinery and the company of a scarred Earth Dog who had found his own acceptance, she began to believe that maybe being different didn't mean being worthless. Jake's workshop occupied a corner of the engineering sector that most station inhabitants never visited. It was a cluttered space filled with spare parts, diagnostic equipment, and half-assembled mechanical projects that served as his personal laboratory. The walls were covered with technical schematics, photos of Earth, and drawings that Rex had somehow learned to create by holding pencils in his mouth. Nyx had been hiding there for 3 days now, and the experience was unlike anything from her previous life. Instead of the sterile perfection of Zektar's quarters, Jake's workshop felt alive with creativity and purpose. Tools hung from magnetic strips, their handles worn smooth by years of use. A small fabrication unit hummed quietly in one corner, producing replacement parts for the station's endless mechanical needs. "Here, try this," Jake said, offering Nyx a bowl of food he had prepared himself. It wasn't the precisely formulated nutrients she was used to, but rather a mixture of ingredients he had somehow acquired from the station's various suppliers. The taste was rich and complex with flavors she had never experienced. Rex lounged nearby, his own meal finished, watching with the satisfied expression of a creature who had long ago learned to trust his human completely. Occasionally he would lift his head to look at Nyx with encouraging eyes, as if to say that Jake's kindness was nothing unusual. It was simply who he was. I've been thinking about your situation, Jake continued, settling into his work chair with a cup of coffee. Whoever owned you before clearly didn't understand what they had. Those markings they think are defects? They're actually kind of beautiful. Makes you unique. Nyx tilted her head, studying this human who said such impossible things. In Velthari society, uniqueness was synonymous with failure. Genetic perfection was the only acceptable standard, and deviation was cause for immediate rejection. Yet Jake spoke of her differences as though they were valuable rather than shameful. The workshop's communication system chimed, and Maria's voice came through the speakers. Jake, we've got a problem. Commander Zektar is down here with station security, asking questions about unauthorized access to the maintenance tunnels. Jake's expression darkened. Copy that, Maria. Keep them busy in Sector 9. I'll be right there. He turned to Nyx, his voice gentle but serious. I need you to stay hidden for a while. Rex will keep you company. The Earth Dog seemed to understand, moving closer to Nyx and settling down beside her with a protective posture. Through the workshop's small window, Nyx could see into the main engineering bay where Jake emerged to meet with the security team. Commander Zektar stood among them, his silver skin gleaming under the harsh industrial lighting. Even from a distance, Nyx could see the irritation in his posture. Chief Engineer Morrison. Zektar's melodic voice carried clearly through the workshop's audio pickups. I'm told there was a security incident in this sector 3 days ago. An escaped animal was tracked to this area. Jake's response was calm and professional. Yes, sir. We had some unauthorized personnel in the maintenance tunnels. They triggered our emergency containment protocols and were escorted out by security. And you saw nothing of a Canis Stellaris during this incident? Zektar pressed, his eyes scanning the engineering bay with obvious suspicion. A Stellaris? Jake's voice carried just the right note of surprise. Those are pretty rare, aren't they? I'm afraid I wouldn't know one if I saw it, Commander. My expertise is in mechanical systems, not exotic pets. Nyx watched from her hiding spot as Zektar studied Jake with the calculating gaze of a predator. Her former master was intelligent and experienced in reading other beings. If Jake showed even the slightest tell, Zektar would detect it. But the human remained perfectly composed, discussing technical specifications with the security team as though nothing unusual had occurred. He even invited them to inspect the engineering section, guiding them through areas where Nyx was certain not to be discovered. The maintenance tunnel breach was repaired immediately, Jake explained, showing them the sealed access point. We can't afford environmental compromises in this sector. Too many critical systems rely on stable atmospheric conditions. What amazed Nyx was not just Jake's ability to deceive her former master, but his willingness to do so. He was risking his career, his position on the station, possibly even his freedom, all to protect a creature he had known for only 3 days. It was a level of loyalty and courage that she had never experienced even during her years as Zektar's prized companion. After the security team left, Jake returned to the workshop with a troubled expression. That was close, he said, running his hands through his dark hair. Your former owner is persistent and he's got resources. We need to think about a long-term solution. Rex bounded over to Jake, sensing his tension and offering comfort in the way that only a loyal companion could. Jake scratched behind the dog's ears and Nyx could see some of the stress leave his shoulders. You know what the funny thing is, Jake said, looking directly at Nyx. Zektar talks about you like you're a defective piece of equipment. But Rex here taught me something important about perfection. He gestured to the Earth Dog, whose scars and asymmetrical features were clearly visible in the workshop's lighting. Rex wasn't bred in any fancy laboratory. His parents were probably strays who found each other in some back alley on Earth. He's got a torn ear from a fight with a cargo loader, mismatched eyes from a genetic quirk, and a personality that's part noble warrior and part complete goofball. Rex's tail wagged at the attention, his entire body wiggling with joy despite his imperfections. But he's also the most loyal, intelligent, and loving companion I've ever had, Jake continued. He saved my life twice, kept me sane during 18-month tours in deep space, and never once made me feel like I wasn't good enough for his friendship. That's not defective, that's extraordinary. For the first time since her defects had appeared, Nyx began to understand that worth wasn't determined by genetic perfection or social status. It was measured in loyalty, courage, and the capacity to love and be loved in return. These were qualities that couldn't be engineered in a laboratory or bought with credits. As the station's artificial night cycle began, Jake prepared sleeping arrangements for his unexpected guests. He set up a comfortable area for Nyx near his own sleeping quarters, making sure she felt secure and included rather than hidden away like a shameful secret. "Tomorrow we'll start working on a plan," he promised, settling down with Rex curled up at his feet. "There's got to be a way to keep you safe without putting the whole engineering crew at risk." But Nyx had already begun formulating her own plans. She had spent 3 days observing Jake's work, watching him solve complex problems with creativity and determination. She was beginning to understand that humans possessed something her former master's species lacked: the ability to see potential where others saw only problems. As she drifted off to sleep in the workshop's gentle hum, Nyx found herself wondering not just how to survive, but how to prove that Jake's faith in her was justified. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for the first time in months, she felt ready to face them. The emergency klaxon shattered the artificial dawn of the station's morning cycle, its harsh wail echoing through every corridor and compartment of orbital station Kepler 7. In Jake's workshop, Nyx jerked awake from the most peaceful sleep she had experienced in months, her enhanced senses immediately analyzing the crisis. "All hands to emergency stations," the automated system announced. "Catastrophic failure in primary reactor cooling system. Radiation leak detected in sectors 15 through 21. This is not a drill." Jake was already moving, his practiced hands reaching for emergency gear while his mind processed the implications. Rex had also awakened, his ears perked and alert, ready to follow his human into whatever danger awaited. "Maria, report," Jake called into his communicator as he pulled on a radiation-resistant suit. "It's bad, Jake," came the reply, tinged with barely controlled panic. "Something caused a cascade failure in the primary cooling manifold. We've got approximately 4 hours before the reactor goes critical. The automatic repair systems are offline, and the radiation levels are too high for most species to survive long enough to make manual repairs." Jake paused in his preparations, his face grim. Nyx could see him calculating odds, weighing options, preparing to risk his life to save the thousands of beings aboard the station. It was exactly the kind of selfless courage she had come to expect from him. "Rex, you stay here with Nyx," Jake ordered. "The radiation levels will be lethal even for you, buddy." But as Jake prepared to leave for what might be a suicide mission, Nyx realized something that made her heart race with both fear and purpose. Her enhanced physiology included radiation resistance, a feature built into the Canis Stellaris genetic template to allow them to accompany their masters on dangerous deep space missions. She could survive in areas that would kill humans in minutes. More importantly, her weeks of watching Jake work had given her detailed knowledge of the station's mechanical systems. Her enhanced intelligence had absorbed every lesson, every repair procedure, every safety protocol. She might be the only creature on the station capable of both surviving the radiation and understanding the complex repairs needed. Jake was halfway to the door when Nyx made her decision. She bounded past him, blocking his path with her body, her amber eyes meeting his with urgent intensity. "Nyx, I don't have time for this," Jake said, his voice strained with the weight of imminent disaster. "I have to go save the station." But Nyx had learned enough human body language to communicate her intent. She pressed her paw against the radiation detector on Jake's equipment belt, then touched her own chest. The device's reading showed levels that would be immediately fatal to humans but were within her tolerance range. Understanding dawned in Jake's eyes. "You can survive the radiation," he breathed. "But Nyx, the repairs are incredibly complex. One mistake and the entire reactor could—" Nyx moved to his work terminal and, using her nose to activate the touchscreen, pulled up the reactor schematics that Jake had been studying. With precise movements, she traced the cooling system pathways, indicating the critical junction points where repairs would be needed. Her actions demonstrated not just intelligence but specific technical knowledge that stunned Jake into silence. "My God," he whispered. "You understand the systems. You've been learning." The klaxon continued its urgent wail as Jake made the hardest decision of his life. Instead of rushing off to a heroic death, he began rapidly explaining the repair procedures to a creature that everyone else considered a defective pet. "The main coolant valve is here," he said, pointing to the schematic. "But you'll need to bypass the safety interlocks first, then manually adjust the flow regulators. The sequence has to be perfect or the pressure differential will cause an explosion." Nyx absorbed every detail, her enhanced memory cataloging each step with perfect clarity. Jake's explanation was clear and precise, his confidence in her abilities growing with each passing moment. "Maria, I'm sending in a repair specialist," Jake announced over the communicator. "She's radiation resistant and knows the systems." "Thank God, who is it?" Maria's reply crackled with hope. Jake looked at Nyx, his expression filled with trust and affection. "Someone who proves that worth isn't measured by genetic perfection. Someone who's about to save all our lives." The journey through the station's corridors to the reactor sector was like traveling through a disaster zone. Emergency lights cast eerie shadows, and the few crew members they encountered were evacuating in the opposite direction. The radiation levels climbed steadily on Jake's detector as they approached the damaged area. At the entrance to Sector 18, Jake stopped. "This is as far as I can go," he said, his voice heavy with concern. "The radiation beyond this point will kill me in minutes. You're on your own from here." Nyx looked back at him, understanding the magnitude of what she was about to attempt. She was no longer the pampered companion who had cowered in Zektar's quarters. She was no longer defined by her imperfections or her former master's rejection. She was a creature with unique abilities and knowledge, about to prove her worth in the most crucial way possible. Jake knelt down and placed his hand gently on her head. "I believe in you, girl. You're not defective. You're exactly what we need." With those words echoing in her enhanced hearing, Nyx plunged into the radioactive darkness of the damaged reactor sector. The corridors here were filled with emergency lighting and the ominous hum of failing systems. Steam leaked from damaged pipes and the air shimmered with heat and radiation. Her first task was to reach the primary cooling manifold, a massive piece of machinery located at the heart of the reactor complex. The path was treacherous, with debris blocking several passages and radiation levels that would have been instantly lethal to most species. But her enhanced physiology held up, her body processing and neutralizing the deadly energy that surrounded her. When she finally reached the manifold, Nyx could see the extent of the damage. A cascade failure had caused multiple systems to shut down simultaneously, creating a chain reaction that threatened the entire station. But Jake's training had prepared her for this moment. Working with precise efficiency, she began the complex sequence of repairs. Her enhanced dexterity allowed her to manipulate controls that had been designed for Velthari hands, while her perfect memory ensured that each step was executed in the correct order. The safety interlocks yielded to her touch. The flow regulators responded to her adjustments, and slowly, gradually, the failing systems began to stabilize. As the reactor's crisis indicators shifted from red to amber to green, Nyx realized that she had done more than save the station. She had proven that true worth wasn't about meeting someone else's standards of perfection. It was about using whatever abilities you possess to help others, regardless of how those abilities were perceived by society. When she finally emerged from the reactor sector, Jake was waiting with tears in his eyes and Rex dancing around his feet with excitement. The station's emergency klaxons had fallen silent, replaced by the steady hum of normal operations. "You did it," Jake said simply. "You saved us all." But Nyx knew that Jake had saved her first by seeing value where others saw only defects, by offering love where others offered only rejection. In doing so, he had created something more powerful than any genetic enhancement. He had forged a bond based on mutual respect and genuine affection. News of the reactor crisis and its unlikely hero spread through the galactic communications network faster than any official report could travel. Within hours of the successful repairs, beings across dozens of star systems were discussing the Canis Stellaris, who had saved orbital station Kepler-7. The story took on different forms as it passed from species to species, but the core remained the same. A creature deemed worthless by her original master had proven to be more valuable than anyone imagined. In Jake's workshop, now permanently expanded to accommodate his growing family of companions, Nyx found herself dealing with an attention she had never sought. Representatives from news organizations, scientific institutions, and even military commands requested interviews and meetings. Jake fielded most of these requests with the protective instincts of someone who understood the cost of fame. She's not a spectacle, he told a particularly persistent Velthari journalist who had somehow gained access to the engineering section. She's a living being who deserves respect and privacy. Rex, who had appointed himself as Nyx's unofficial bodyguard, positioned himself between her and any unfamiliar visitors. His scarred appearance and unwavering loyalty had also caught the attention of the galactic media, turning him into an unexpected symbol of the value found in the overlooked and abandoned. But it was Dr. Elena Vasquez, a xenobiologist from the Earth Science Consortium, who brought news that would change everything. She arrived on the station 3 weeks after the reactor incident, carrying data that Jake found both fascinating and infuriating. Your companion's genetic variations aren't defects at all, Dr. Vasquez explained, her scientific instruments detecting capabilities in Nyx that the Velthari had completely missed. The asymmetrical markings correspond to enhanced neural pathways. The ear irregularity actually improves her ability to detect subsonic vibrations. What her previous owner saw as failures are actually evolutionary improvements. Jake listened to the explanation while maintaining a steady stroke along Nyx's fur. She could sense his anger building, not at the discovery itself, but at the implications of what it meant. So the Velthari genetic engineers created something better than they intended, then threw it away because it didn't match their aesthetic preferences. Jake's voice carried a cold fury that Nyx had never heard before. It appears so, Dr. Vasquez confirmed. In fact, based on my scans, Nyx represents the next step in Canis stellaris evolution. Her cognitive abilities exceed the normal range by nearly 40%, and her physiological adaptations make her suitable for environments that would challenge even the baseline species. The irony was not lost on anyone in the room. The Velthari, with their obsession with genetic perfection, had achieved exactly what they claimed to want, a superior companion species. But their inability to look beyond surface appearances had caused them to discard their greatest success. Rex, understanding the conversation through context and Jake's emotional state, moved closer to Nyx and offered the comfort that came from shared experience. He had also been unwanted once, deemed too ugly and too common for polite society. Now he was part of a family that valued him for exactly who he was. There's something else, Dr. Vasquez continued, consulting her datapad. The modifications that created Nyx's enhanced abilities appear to be heritable. If she were to have offspring, they would likely carry the same improvements. The Velthari essentially threw away the future of their own companion species. Jake stood up abruptly, his decision crystallizing with the finality of someone who had seen enough injustice. Dr. Vasquez, I want you to publish your findings. All of them. Make sure every genetic laboratory, every research institution, and every Velthari breeder knows exactly what they're looking for. Jake, that could have significant political implications, the scientist warned. The Velthari Council takes their genetic programs very seriously. They might see this as interference in their internal affairs. Good, Jake replied with steel in his voice. Maybe it's time someone interfered. How many other defective companions are out there right now, facing the same fate Nyx almost did? How many remarkable beings are being discarded because they don't fit someone's narrow definition of perfection? As if summoned by Jake's passionate words, his communicator chimed with an incoming message. The holographic image that appeared showed a young Velthari female, her silver skin bearing the stress marks of someone under enormous emotional pressure. Mr. Morrison, she said, her melodic voice trembling with barely controlled emotion. My name is Silara. I serve aboard the research vessel Quantum Harmony. We heard about your companion and the reactor incident. I need to speak with you about a matter of urgent importance. Jake exchanged glances with Dr. Vasquez before responding. I'm listening. 3 days ago, our ship's geneticist ordered the disposal of 6 Canis stellaris companions due to various cosmetic irregularities. The crew, we couldn't bring ourselves to follow through with the order. The companions are currently hidden in our cargo bay, but we don't know what to do with them. If we're discovered, we'll face court-martial and imprisonment. The implications hit Jake like a physical blow. The story of Nyx's heroism had inspired others to question the systematic disposal of imperfect companions, but it had also put well-meaning beings at risk for showing basic compassion. Where are you now? Jake asked, his mind already working on solutions. We're currently docked at Trading Station Nexus 4, approximately 6 hours from your position. Mr. Morrison, these companions, they're remarkable. One of them solved a complex navigation puzzle that had been stumping our engineers for weeks. Another detected a microfracture in our hull plating that our sensors missed completely. They're not defects, they're miracles. Dr. Vasquez leaned forward, her scientific curiosity overriding diplomatic concerns. Sil'ara, can you describe the specific variations these companions display? Asymmetrical markings, unusual ear configurations, irregular fur patterns, all the traits that the Genetic Council considers failures. But their behavior, their intelligence, their intuitive understanding of complex systems, it's unlike anything we've seen in standard Stellaris companions. Jake looked down at Nix, who had been following the conversation with obvious understanding. Her amber eyes met his, and he saw something there that took his breath away. Not just intelligence, but wisdom. She understood that this moment was bigger than her own rescue, bigger than her own survival. This was about changing an entire system of values that condemned beings based on appearance rather than worth. Sil'ara, I want you to bring those companions here, Jake said firmly. Dr. Vasquez, can your people provide documentation for 6 additional test subjects? Jake, that's essentially declaring war on the Velthari genetic establishment, Dr. Vasquez warned. They won't take kindly to humans interfering with their companion breeding programs. Then maybe it's time for a war, Jake replied. A war against prejudice, against the idea that worth is determined by conformity to arbitrary standards. Nick showed us that different doesn't mean defective. Maybe it's time the galaxy learned that lesson. Rex barked once sharply as if agreeing with Jake's declaration. Nix moved to Jake's side, pressing against his leg in a gesture of support and solidarity. For the first time since her abandonment, she felt part of something larger than herself, a movement that could change the fate of countless others like her. Over the following days, Jake's workshop transformed into something resembling a refugee center. The 6 companions from the Quantum Harmony arrived with Sil'ara, who had risked everything to transport them safely. Each companion bore the genetic variations that the Velthari considered flaws, and each displayed remarkable abilities that defied conventional understanding. There was Zara, whose mismatched eyes could detect electromagnetic fluctuations invisible to standard sensors. Nova, whose irregular fur pattern contained specialized follicles that could sense atmospheric pressure changes with extraordinary precision. Cosmos, whose asymmetrical features included enhanced olfactory capabilities that could identify chemical compositions at the molecular level. Jake worked with Dr. Vasquez to document each companion's unique abilities, building a comprehensive database that would prove beyond doubt that these supposed defects were actually evolutionary advantages. But more importantly, he created an environment where each companion could discover their own value and purpose. The workshop became a proving ground for abilities that the Velthari had never bothered to test. Under Jake's patient guidance, the companions learned to use their enhanced capabilities in practical applications. They assisted with complex repairs, detected problems that electronic sensors missed, and demonstrated problem-solving skills that rivaled those of trained engineers. But the real transformation was emotional rather than technical. These companions, who had been abandoned and condemned by their creators, began to understand their own worth. They formed bonds with Jake, with Rex, and with each other that were based on mutual respect and genuine affection, rather than ownership and status. News of the defective companion sanctuary spread throughout the galaxy, inspiring some and enraging others. The Velthari Genetic Council demanded the return of their property, while human rights organizations rallied to support Jake's cause. Trade stations and orbital platforms began reporting their own incidents of companions being secretly rescued rather than disposed of. The movement that had started with one abandoned Stellaris was becoming a galactic phenomenon, challenging fundamental assumptions about genetic perfection and individual worth. And at the center of it all was Jake, a human mechanic who had simply seen value where others saw only flaws. As he watched Nix work alongside her new family of companions, solving problems and proving their worth with every passing day, Jake realized that this was about more than just rescued animals. This was about redefining what it meant to be valuable, to be loved, and to belong somewhere in the vast expanse of the galaxy. The formal challenge arrived exactly 37 days after Nix had saved the station. It came through official channels bearing the seal of the Velthari Genetic Council and the personal signature of High Geneticist Mordun, the most respected authority on companion breeding in the known galaxy. Jake read the document 3 times before its full implications sank in. "They want a formal evaluation," he told Dr. Vasquez, who had remained on the station to continue her research. "A public demonstration comparing standard Canis stellaris specimens with our defective companions. Winner takes all. If we lose, all the companions go back to their original disposal orders." Rex, who had learned to read Jake's emotional states with uncanny accuracy, pressed closer to his human's leg, offering silent support. Around the workshop, the 7 rescued companions sensed the tension and gathered near Jake, their enhanced intelligence allowing them to understand that their fate hung in the balance. Nix, as the unofficial leader of the group, approached Jake directly. Her amber eyes met his with an intensity that spoke of determination rather than fear. She had been discarded once and had proven her worth through courage and skill. She was ready to do so again, but this time she wouldn't be alone. "The High Geneticist is bringing 12 of their finest specimens," Dr. Vasquez continued, reading from her own copy of the challenge. "Genetically perfect Stellaris companions bred specifically for this demonstration. They'll be tested in intelligence, problem-solving, physical capabilities, and adaptive responses." Jake felt a familiar anger building in his chest. They're treating this like a dog show. These aren't objects to be judged and evaluated. They're living beings with their own thoughts and feelings. But Silara, who had remained on the station to help care for the rescued companions, offered a different perspective. "Among my people, formal challenges are matters of honor and law. If we refuse, the Council has the authority to seize the companions by force. But if we accept and win, their decision becomes legally binding across all Velthari territories." The weight of the decision settled on Jake's shoulders like a physical burden. He could protect the companions by refusing the challenge, but doing so would condemn countless others to disposal. Or he could risk everything on a single demonstration, knowing that failure would mean death for the companions who had come to trust him. He looked around the workshop at the beings who had transformed his life as much as he had transformed theirs. Zara was helping Rex organize tool components, her mismatched eyes allowing her to sort items by electromagnetic signature. Nova was monitoring atmospheric readings, her irregular fur patterns detecting pressure variations that the station's sensors missed. Cosmos was analyzing chemical samples, his enhanced olfactory system identifying trace compounds with precision that amazed the station's scientists. These weren't defective creatures hiding from the world. They were remarkable beings who had found their purpose and were eager to prove their worth. "We accept," Jake announced, his voice carrying a confidence he didn't entirely feel. "But we do this on our terms. The tests will be practical applications, not arbitrary measures of genetic perfection." The preparation period that followed was intense and focused. Jake worked with each companion to identify their unique strengths and develop strategies that would showcase their abilities effectively. Dr. Vasquez provided scientific backing for their capabilities, creating detailed documentation that would support their case regardless of the challenge outcome. But the real preparation was emotional and psychological. The companions had spent their entire lives being told they were failures, unwanted mistakes in an otherwise perfect system. Now they needed to believe in themselves enough to perform under the scrutiny of the very beings who had rejected them. Rex played a crucial role in this preparation, serving as an example of how perceived flaws could become sources of strength. His torn ear, which had resulted from a cargo accident, gave him enhanced directional hearing. His mismatched eyes, caused by a genetic quirk, allowed him to perceive different light spectrums simultaneously. His scars told stories of survival and courage rather than failure and inadequacy. "The thing about being different," Jake told the companions during one of their evening sessions, "is that it means you can do things that others can't. The Velthari created you to be perfect copies of an ideal, but you became something better. You became yourselves." When High Geneticist Morden arrived with his entourage and perfect specimens, the contrast was immediately apparent. The Council's companions were flawless examples of genetic engineering, with symmetrical markings, perfect proportions, and coat patterns that seemed to shimmer with artificial perfection. They moved with practiced precision, responding to their handlers' commands with mechanical obedience. But there was something missing in their amber eyes, the spark of individual personality that made Nyx and her companions so remarkable. They were perfect, but they were also hollow, shaped entirely by their creator's expectations rather than their own experiences and choices. The testing arena was set up in the station's main assembly hall, with representatives from dozens of species in attendance. News crews from across the galaxy broadcast the proceedings, understanding that the outcome would set precedents for genetic engineering practices throughout civilized space. The first test was problem-solving under pressure. Both groups were presented with a complex mechanical puzzle that required not just intelligence but creative thinking and the ability to adapt when standard approaches failed. The perfect specimens approached the challenge methodically, following logical sequences and predetermined algorithms, but when their programmed responses proved inadequate, they became confused and frustrated. They had been trained to follow patterns, not to innovate when patterns failed. Nyx and her companions approached the same puzzle differently. They explored unconventional solutions, communicated with each other to share insights, and adapted their strategies based on real-time observations. When Cosmos detected unusual chemical residues that indicated a hidden mechanism, Zara used her electromagnetic perception to trace the control circuits, while Nova's pressure sensitivity revealed the precise sequence needed to activate the solution. They solved the puzzle in half the time it took the perfect specimens, demonstrating not just intelligence, but the kind of creative problem-solving that could only come from minds that had learned to see beyond conventional limitations. The second test involved environmental adaptation, placing both groups in simulated emergency conditions that challenged their physical and mental capabilities. Again, the perfect specimens struggled when faced with situations outside their training parameters. They had been bred for controlled environments and specific functions, not for the unpredictable challenges of real-world survival. But Nyx and her companions thrived in chaos. Their genetic variations, the very traits that had marked them as defective, proved to be advantages when dealing with unexpected challenges. They worked as a team, supporting each other's weaknesses and amplifying each other's strengths in ways that the perfect specimens couldn't match. As the testing continued, it became increasingly clear that perfection and superiority were not the same thing. The Council's specimens were flawless examples of what the Velthari thought they wanted. But Nyx's group represented what they actually needed: companions capable of genuine partnership rather than mere obedience. High geneticist Mordun watched the proceedings with growing dismay, his confidence in genetic perfection crumbling with each demonstration. The companions he had dismissed as worthless failures were proving themselves superior in every meaningful way to his carefully crafted masterpieces. But the final test would be the most challenging of all, and Jake knew that everything they had worked for hung in the balance of one last demonstration that would determine not just the fate of 7 rescued companions, but the future of genetic diversity throughout the galaxy. The final test came without warning, as real emergencies always do. The simulated challenges had barely concluded when alarms began blaring throughout the station, signaling a genuine crisis that would determine once and for all which companions possessed true value. Multiple hull breaches in Sector 12, the emergency system announced. Meteor shower has penetrated outer defenses. Structural integrity compromised. All personnel evacuate affected areas immediately. The assembly hall erupted in controlled chaos as beings rushed to emergency stations. But Jake found himself looking not toward the exits but at the companions who had just completed their formal evaluation. This wasn't a test anymore. This was exactly the kind of real-world crisis that separated theoretical perfection from practical excellence. High geneticist. Mordun's perfect specimens huddled near their handlers, awaiting instructions on how to respond to this unscripted event. They had been bred for predictable situations and formal demonstrations, not for the chaotic uncertainty of genuine emergencies. But Nyx was already moving, her enhanced hearing detecting structural stress patterns that the station's sensors hadn't yet identified. She barked sharply to her companions, and without any human direction, they began organizing themselves into an effective response team. Jake, Commander Zektar's voice cut through the emergency comm system, his usual arrogance replaced by barely controlled panic. We need every available resource. The breaches are in sections with critical life support infrastructure. We're looking at potential station-wide evacuation if we can't seal them quickly. Jake looked at Nyx, seeing in her amber eyes the same determination that had driven her to save the reactor weeks ago. But this time she wasn't alone. This time, she had 6 companions whose unique abilities could make the difference between salvation and disaster. "Commander," Jake replied, his voice steady despite the magnitude of the crisis. "I'm sending a specialized repair team to Sector 12. They're equipped to handle extreme conditions and complex problem-solving." He turned to the 7 companions kneeling to address them as equals, rather than as animals to be commanded. "This is what we've been preparing for. Not the tests, not the demonstrations, but this. The moment when everything we are gets put to the real test." Rex positioned himself next to Jake, his scarred face showing absolute confidence in his extended family. Dr. Vasquez quickly activated her portable scanning equipment, providing real-time data on the companions' physiological responses as they prepared for their most dangerous mission yet. The journey to Sector 12 revealed the extent of the crisis. Meteor impacts had torn 3 separate holes in the station's hull, creating a cascade of structural failures that threatened to tear the entire section apart. Emergency force fields flickered unstably, barely containing the vacuum of space while repair crews struggled to reach the most critical damage points. "It's impossible," one of the Velthari engineers reported over the comm. "The breach pattern is too complex. We'd need to coordinate repairs from 3 different locations simultaneously while maintaining structural integrity. No single team has the capability to manage all those variables." But as Jake and the companions approached the disaster zone, it became clear that no single team was exactly what they didn't need. What they needed was 7 individuals working as one, each contributing their unique abilities to solve a problem that no amount of genetic perfection could address. Nova's pressure-sensitive fur patterns immediately detected the stress points where the hull was most likely to fail next. Zara's electromagnetic perception traced the power grid failures that were causing the force field instabilities. Cosmos's enhanced olfactory system identified atmospheric leaks that were invisible to conventional sensors, and Nyx, drawing on her weeks of training with Jake, coordinated the entire effort with an intelligence that transcended anything the Velthari had thought possible in a companion. "Species, force field generator. 3 needs a manual reset," she communicated to Jake through a series of precisely timed barks and gestures that they had developed together. "Zara's detecting a power coupling failure in junction box 7. Nova says the pressure differential in breach 2 is increasing. It'll blow out completely in approximately 6 minutes." Jake found himself not giving orders, but rather serving as a translator and facilitator for a repair effort that was being directed by beings that most of the galaxy considered barely sentient. The companions spread out across the disaster zone, each taking responsibility for critical aspects of the repair process while maintaining constant communication with their teammates. Not high geneticist Morden and his perfect specimens had followed the emergency response team, but found themselves relegated to the role of observers as the defective companions demonstrated capabilities that their genetically superior counterparts couldn't match. "This is impossible," Morden muttered, watching Cosmos guide repair robots to atmospheric leak points that the most sophisticated sensors had missed. "The genetic programming doesn't allow for this level of autonomous decision-making." "Maybe that's the problem," Dr. Vasquez replied, not taking her eyes off her scanner readings. "You programmed them to be perfect companions, but you didn't allow them to become perfect individuals." The repair operation continued with an efficiency that amazed everyone involved. Where the station's regular repair crews would have needed hours to coordinate such a complex effort, the companions accomplished it in minutes through intuitive cooperation and individual expertise. Nyx found herself working directly with Rex, the Earth Dog's experience and the Stellaris' enhanced abilities, combining to solve problems that neither could have addressed alone. Their partnership became a symbol of what was possible, when differences were seen as strengths rather than flaws. When the last force field stabilized and the final hull patch sealed into place, Sector 12 was not just repaired but actually stronger than it had been before the meteor strikes. The companions had not simply fixed the damage, they had improved the original design through their unique perspectives and abilities. The silence that followed was broken by slow, deliberate applause from Commander Zektar. The Vel-3 officer who had once discarded Nyx as worthless now looked at her with something approaching awe. High geneticist Morden, Zektar said formally, "I believe the evaluation is complete. The evidence speaks for itself." Morden stood in the repaired corridor, surrounded by companions whose genetic imperfections had just saved thousands of lives. His perfect specimens remained near their handlers, having contributed nothing to the emergency response beyond their presence. "I have spent my entire career believing that perfection was the highest goal of genetic engineering," Morden said slowly, his melodic voice heavy with the weight of revelation. "But perfection implies completion, an end to growth, adaptation, and improvement. These companions you call defective have shown me that what I created was not perfection, but stagnation." He approached Nix, who regarded him with calm intelligence rather than fear or resentment. "You were not a failure of my process," he continued. "You were an evolution beyond it. Your variations are not defects to be corrected, but advances to be celebrated." Jake felt a profound sense of satisfaction as he watched the high geneticist formally acknowledge what he had known from the beginning. That worth was not determined by conformity to external standards, but by the courage to be authentically yourself and use your unique gifts to help others. Over the following months, the Velthari Genetic Council underwent fundamental changes in their breeding philosophy. Rather than pursuing genetic uniformity, they began to encourage and celebrate variations that might lead to enhanced capabilities. The term defective was removed from their official documentation, replaced with variant or enhanced. Companions throughout the galaxy who had been marked for disposal found themselves suddenly valuable, sought after for the very traits that had once condemned them. Rescue operations sprang up on dozens of worlds, with humans often taking the lead in recognizing and nurturing abilities that other species had overlooked. Jake's workshop became a training center where rescued companions learned to understand and develop their unique capabilities. Rex, now recognized as the first example of interspecies cooperation in emergency response, became an instructor and mentor for newly rescued companions. And Nix, the abandoned creature who had once cowered in a corner waiting for disposal, became a symbol of the transformation that was possible when someone looked beyond surface imperfections to see the remarkable individual beneath. But perhaps the most important change was in how beings throughout the galaxy began to view themselves and each other. The story of the companions had demonstrated that diversity was not just acceptable, but essential, that the very differences that made individuals unique were often the qualities that made them most valuable. In Jake's workshop, surrounded by companions whose genetic variations had become their greatest strengths, the human mechanic reflected on how much had changed since he had first opened his door to a frightened, abandoned creature. He had thought he was rescuing her, but in the end she had rescued him as well, teaching him that the greatest perfection lay not in conformity, but in the courage to embrace way